palace was quiet that morning, but there was a sense of excitement in the air. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, falling on the polished wooden floors and the walls lined with paintings of past generations. Outside, the gardens were alive with birds singing, and the fountains sparkled as water danced in the sunlight. Inside, the staff moved quietly, arranging chairs and placing fresh flowers in vases. Everyone was waiting for a special guest, and the news had traveled fast. A famous pianist was visiting the palace. The young prince, curious and full of energy, peeked around a large velvet curtain. He was not usually allowed to roam freely when guests were present, but today was different. There was something about the mention of a famous musician coming that made him eager to see. He loved music, though he had not spent much time learning it formally. But he remembered the sound of the piano from the grand hall, the deep notes that could feel like they were speaking directly to him. He wanted to see if today would be different. The pianist arrived quietly, stepping out of a black car with a small entourage. His reputation preceded him not just for his skill, but also for his playful personality. Even though he was known for being serious during concerts in casual settings, he liked to have fun. Today, he had agreed to a small demonstration at the palace, nothing formal, just a friendly visit. He carried his hands behind his back, smiling at the staff as they greeted him. His eyes twinkled, hinting at mischief, as though he already had a playful plan in mind. The young prince watched from a distance, fascinated. He had never seen someone so confident, someone whose presence could fill a room without even trying. The pianist walked towards the grand piano that sat in the middle of the hall, its black and white keys shining like little mirrors. He ran his fingers lightly across the keys, producing a soft sound that echoed gently through the space. The prince's eyes widened. He wanted to touch the piano, to feel the keys under his fingers, but he hesitated. What if he made a mistake? What if he sounded silly in front of the pianist? The pianist turned suddenly and noticed him. "Ah, you there. Come closer," he said in a warm voice, waving the young prince over. The prince blinked, unsure if he had been invited. Slowly, he walked forward, feeling his heart race. His small steps seemed loud in the quiet hall, but the pianist only smiled. "Do you play?" he asked. The prince shook his head. "Not really," he admitted, his voice soft. "I like listening, but I'm not very good." The pianist chuckled, a sound that was both kind and teasing. "Not good? That sounds like a challenge. Maybe you just need a little fun. How about this, you try a simple tune? Nothing difficult, just a few notes. If you make a mistake, we will all laugh together. Okay?" The prince hesitated. He was shy, and the thought of everyone watching him made him nervous. But something about the pianist's smile made him trust him. He nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. The pianist clapped his hands lightly. "Wonderful. Come sit. Let's see what you can do." He gestured to the piano bench, patting the space beside him. The prince moved closer, his small fingers hovering over the keys. He pressed a key lightly, then another, creating a sound that made him jump slightly. The pianist laughed softly, not in mockery, but in delight. "Good start," he said. "Now try this simple tune. Don't worry if it's not perfect. Music is about joy, not mistakes." He played the first few notes slowly, letting the young prince watch his hands. The prince mimicked the movements, carefully pressing the keys. The sound was uneven at first, some notes missing, some clumsy, but he kept going. He wanted to do it right. He wanted to impress, even if just a little. The pianist leaned back, watching quietly. He knew the young prince was nervous, and he wanted to give him space. But he also could not resist a small joke. Interesting style," he said with a grin. "Very unique. I think you might be inventing a new kind of music. People will talk about this for years." The prince frowned slightly, unsure if the comment was serious. "Do you mean I'm playing badly?" he asked quietly. "Not at all," the pianist replied quickly, raising his hands. "I mean, wonderfully. You have your own voice in music. Most people just copy, but you create. Keep going." The prince felt a tiny spark of confidence. The pianist's words were playful, yes, but also encouraging. He pressed the keys again, trying to follow the tune, adding small flourishes here and there. The sound was not perfect, but it was growing smoother. He was beginning to enjoy himself, feeling the music move under his fingers. Staff and guests who had been standing quietly began to gather near the piano. They whispered to each other, surprised to see the prince actually trying. Some expected him to shy away immediately, but there he was, focused and determined. The pianist noticed their attention and winked at the prince. "See? You have an audience. Don't let them scare you. Music is about sharing, not worrying." The prince nodded, feeling more relaxed. He began to play a short melody, one he had heard before, something simple but sweet. The notes stumbled here and there, but he kept his rhythm steady. A few guests smiled softly, impressed by his bravery. The pianist clapped lightly, not too loudly, just enough to encourage him. "Ah, I see some talent hiding there," the pianist said, leaning forward. "Not bad at all. But what if we make it a little more fun?" He tapped a few keys in a playful pattern and challenged the prince to follow. "Copy me if you can. No pressure." The prince's eyes lit up. This was not a test. It was a game. He tried to mimic the pianist's pattern, laughing softly when he hit the wrong key. The pianist laughed with him, a sound that made the room feel warm and alive. Every mistake became part of the fun, and the young prince forgot about his nervousness. Time passed quickly. What began as a simple joke had turned into a shared moment of joy. The prince experimented more, pressing keys confidently, adding little twists and variations. The pianist clapped when he heard something particularly pleasant, and the prince's smile grew wider. For the first time, he realized that music could be a way to express himself, not just something to admire from a distance. A staff member quietly remarked to another, "I never thought he would actually try. He's usually so shy." "I know," the other replied. "But see how he's laughing and enjoying himself? This is something special." The pianist noticed the whispers and smiled knowingly. He had been in similar situations before, seeing potential in young people who had never been encouraged. Sometimes all it took was a little playfulness, a little challenge, and the right words at the right time. Today it seemed the prince had found a spark. As the prince continued to play, the pianist decided to make one final, small joke. He leaned back and said, "You know, if you keep playing like this, people might start thinking you are a real pianist. Are you ready for fame?" The prince laughed, a bright, genuine laugh that filled the room. "I just like it," he said simply. "I'm not sure about fame." "Good answer," the pianist said, nodding. "Music is for those who love it, not for those who want applause. But today you have both a little fun and a little attention. That is a rare combination." The prince paused, looking at the keys, then back at the pianist. He felt proud, not because he had performed perfectly, but because he had tried. He had faced the attention, embraced the challenge, and discovered something new about himself. The room seemed brighter now, filled with warmth, laughter, and music. By the time the morning sun had climbed higher, the prince had played several short pieces. Each time he became more confident, more expressive. The pianist clapped after each attempt, encouraging him with playful comments and sincere praise. The staff and guests had stopped whispering. They were fully watching, fully engaged, fully impressed. It was a simple morning, but it became memorable. The pianist had come for a casual visit, expecting perhaps a polite performance or a shy smile. Instead, he found a young prince willing to try, willing to laugh at himself, willing to discover a hidden side of himself. For the prince, it was the beginning of something new, a love for music that would grow quietly, steadily, and powerfully over time. By the time the pianist prepared to leave the hall, the prince was no longer shy. He waved as the pianist stepped back, smiling. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady and sincere. The pianist waved back, his eyes twinkling. "No, thank you. You taught me something too. Never underestimate the joy of trying." The palace staff, watching from the sides, whispered to each other. "I think we just witnessed the start of something remarkable," one said softly. The prince returned to the piano for a moment longer, pressing a few keys gently. The notes floated through the hall, soft and sweet. It was not a perfect performance, but it did not need to be. It was full of heart, curiosity, and courage. And in that moment, the young prince knew that music could be a friend, a teacher, and a secret companion, ready to reveal itself whenever he was willing to play. And so the morning ended, not with applause or ceremony, but with a quiet understanding. Even a simple game, a small joke, could become a memory that lasts a lifetime. After the morning's playful encounter with the famous pianist, the young prince found himself thinking about the piano more than ever. Even as he walked through the palace corridors, the sound of the keys lingered in his mind. The sunlight streaming through the windows seemed to carry the memory of each note he had played, each stumble he had corrected, and each smile he had shared with the pianist. He had discovered something unexpected, a tiny spark of confidence in a world that often felt too big and too formal for a child his age. By midday, the palace had returned to its usual rhythm. Staff went about their work quietly, courtiers moved with grace, and the gardens seemed calmer now that the early morning visitors had left. But for the prince, the memory of the piano continued to hum softly in his heart. He could not forget how it felt to press the keys, to hear sound follow his touch, to create something that was both his own and shared with others. He wanted to try again, even though no one had asked him to. The young prince returned to the grand hall, where the piano sat quietly in the corner. The room was empty, except for a few servants who were arranging cushions and tidying the furniture. He slipped past them quietly, as though the hall belonged only to him. Sitting at the piano bench, he let his fingers hover above the keys. He did not play at first. Instead, he remembered the pianist's hands, the way he moved effortlessly over the keys, the little jokes he had made to keep the prince at ease. He pressed a key lightly, then another, testing the sound. It was soft, timid, but comforting. Slowly, he began to try the simple tune he had played that morning. The melody sounded rough at first, some notes missing, some held too long. But he did not care. This time, there was no audience, no expectation, only the quiet hall and the gentle sunlight falling through the windows. He played again and again, each time a little smoother, each time more confident. As the prince practiced, he began to notice details he had not before. The way the keys resisted slightly under his fingers, the way the notes blended together when pressed in quick succession, the way a small pause could make the music feel alive. He experimented with small variations, changing the rhythm, adding a gentle touch here and there. Each sound he created seemed to reflect a piece of his own personality, quiet but determined, playful but curious. Later in the afternoon, one of the palace tutors passed by and noticed the prince at the piano. "I see you have found the keys again," the tutor said softly, smiling. "Did you enjoy your morning with the pianist?" The prince nodded enthusiastically. "It was fun," he said. "I want to try more. I think I can make it sound better if I practice." The tutor's eyes lit up. "That is the spirit," he said. "Music is not just about talent. It is about curiosity and effort. The more you explore, the more you will discover." Encouraged by the tutor's words, the prince continued. He played for hours, experimenting with different melodies, combining notes he had heard before in the palace orchestra with new sequences he invented. Sometimes he played softly, almost whispering the music to himself. Sometimes he pressed the keys with more energy, letting the notes ring loudly in the hall. The sound echoed through the corridors, creating a quiet presence that even the staff could feel, a presence that was both comforting and remarkable. By evening, word of the prince's continued practice had spread among the palace staff. Some whispered to each other, amazed at how focused he had become. "He has always been quiet," one said, "but today he seems different. It is as if the music has awakened something inside him." "Yes," another replied, "I have never seen him so determined. It is more than curiosity now. It is passion." That evening, when the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, the prince sat at the piano once more. This time, he played a melody he had invented himself. It was simple, but it carried emotion, a mix of joy, hesitation, and hope. As he played, he felt a strange kind of freedom. The piano allowed him to express things he could not say with words. Each note seemed to speak directly from his heart, creating a conversation between him and the world around him. When the prince finally stopped, he felt a sense of accomplishment. He had played without fear, without expectation, and without judgment. The music was his, a reflection of his own effort and creativity. He realized that the playful challenge from the famous pianist had done more than teach him a few notes. It had given him confidence, curiosity, and the courage to explore something new on his own. The next day, the prince returned to the hall even earlier. He was eager, almost restless with anticipation. He wanted to try new ideas to push himself further. Today, he was not just playing, he was experimenting. He tried different tempos, changed rhythms mid-melody, and tested how the same note could sound different depending on how he pressed it. Each small discovery made him smile, and sometimes laugh quietly when a combination of notes sounded funny or unexpected. Later in the morning, the pianist returned for a second visit. He had not expected to see the prince again so soon, but he was curious. When he entered the hall, he saw the young prince already at the piano, fingers moving confidently over the keys. The melody was different from yesterday, yet it had a clear sense of purpose. The pianist stopped, watching quietly, a smile forming on his face. The prince noticed him and paused. "I've been practicing," he said simply, a little shy but proud. "I wanted to try something new." The pianist stepped closer, leaning over the piano. "I can hear that," he said, his voice warm. "You are not just playing the notes. You are discovering music." The prince blushed slightly at the compliment. "I'm still not very good," he admitted. "But I like trying. Trying is more important than being perfect," the pianist said. "Every great musician started with small steps, just like yours. What matters is that you are learning and enjoying yourself." Encouraged by the pianist's words, the prince continued to play. This time, he attempted a slightly more complex melody, combining notes from the tune he had learned with improvisation. His fingers stumbled occasionally, but he quickly corrected himself. The pianist watched in quiet amazement, noticing the prince's natural sense of rhythm and his growing confidence. After a few minutes, the pianist could not resist making a small joke. "Ah, I see a future concert coming," he said with a grin. "But remember, you must smile while you play, or the audience will think you are very serious." The prince laughed. "I can smile," he said, pressing a key lightly and adding a playful pause to the melody. The sound filled the hall with lightness, a mixture of skill and innocence. As the morning went on, more palace staff gathered quietly to watch. They whispered to each other, amazed at the prince's dedication. "He is improving so fast," one said. "It is incredible to see him so focused and joyful at the same time." The pianist nodded, sharing their amazement quietly. "I expected a polite attempt," he said softly. "But this is something special. He is not just learning. He is discovering his own style." By afternoon, the prince had played several different melodies, experimenting with speed, rhythm, and expression. He even tried to imitate some of the pianist's techniques, adding small flourishes here and there. The pianist clapped occasionally, offering light-hearted encouragement, but mostly he let the prince explore on his own. The joy of discovery was evident in every movement, every note, every smile. When the day began to end, the prince sat back for a moment, taking a deep breath. He looked at the piano with a sense of gratitude. This instrument, once distant and mysterious, had become a companion, a teacher, and a friend. He had not only learned a few tunes, he had discovered the joy of trying, the excitement of exploration, and the thrill of creating something uniquely his own. The pianist gathered his belongings, ready to leave, but paused to speak to the prince one last time. "Remember, music is more than sound," he said. "It is feeling, it is courage, it is sharing a piece of yourself. Today you shared a lot. Keep playing, keep exploring, and never stop enjoying the journey." The prince nodded, feeling a sense of pride and happiness. "I will," he said simply, and he meant it. As the pianist left the hall, the staff whispered among themselves, inspired by what they had witnessed. "That boy has something extraordinary," one said. "It is rare to see such curiosity and determination at his age." "Yes," another replied. "It is more than talent. It is heart, and heart is what makes music alive." The young prince remained at the piano a little longer, pressing a few more keys softly as the sun dipped lower in the sky. He played not for applause, not for praise, but for himself. Each note carried a sense of wonder, a quiet celebration of his own growth, and a joy that came from simply trying, exploring, and expressing. By the time he finally left the hall, the prince felt a new sense of confidence. He had discovered not just the piano, but a part of himself. He realized that even small, playful challenges could lead to remarkable discoveries. And though the day had begun with a joke, it had ended with something far more meaningful. A lesson in courage, curiosity, and the joy of learning something new. The next morning, the palace seemed unusually quiet for a day that would become so memorable. Sunlight poured through the tall windows of the grand hall, reflecting off the polished floors and the shiny black piano in the center. The young prince entered the hall with a sense of purpose he had never felt before. The memories of the previous encounters with the famous pianist were still fresh in his mind, and they carried a sense of excitement. He could hardly wait to explore more, to see if he could push himself further than before. As he approached the piano, he noticed a few palace staff members quietly watching him from the edges of the hall. They had been told that the young prince had been practicing tirelessly and were curious to see how far he had come. The prince ignored the whispers, focusing instead on the keys in front of him. Today, he felt ready to experiment with more complicated melodies. Yesterday had been fun, but today he wanted to see if he could truly make the piano sing in his own way. He sat on the bench and ran his fingers lightly across the keys. The sound was soft at first, as if the piano itself was testing him. Then, with careful attention, he began a melody he had been practicing since the last visit from the pianist. The tune was slightly longer now, with small changes he had added, experimenting with rhythm and flow. Each note felt like a small victory, a discovery he had made by himself. He smiled quietly, feeling a sense of pride he could hardly put into words. Suddenly, he heard footsteps approaching. It was the famous pianist, returning for another casual visit. The pianist had expected to find the hall empty, but instead, he found the young prince already at the piano, fully immersed in his music. He stopped for a moment, quietly observing. The prince had grown since the last time he had seen him. His fingers moved with more confidence. His posture had improved, and there was a light in his eyes that spoke of determination. The pianist stepped closer, not wanting to interrupt, but curious to see the progress. "I see you have been busy," he said with a warm smile. The young prince looked up, slightly startled but pleased to see him. "Yes," he said simply. "I wanted to try something new." The pianist nodded approvingly. "That is wonderful. May I listen?" The prince hesitated for only a moment before nodding. He took a deep breath and resumed playing. The melody was longer now, weaving together notes he had learned and small improvisations he had discovered on his own. It was not perfect, but it carried a sense of emotion and personality that was impossible to ignore. As the prince played, the pianist could not hide his admiration. He leaned back slightly, listening closely. Each note showed not just skill but creativity. The young prince was no longer just mimicking what he had been taught. He was expressing something unique. There were moments of hesitation, minor mistakes that he quickly corrected, but these only added to the charm of the performance. It was as if the piano and the prince were speaking to each other, creating a conversation through music. The staff and a few palace guests who had been allowed to enter quietly began to gather, drawn by the sound. They whispered in amazement as they watched the young prince, noting how naturally he seemed to understand the instrument. "He is incredible," one whispered. "For someone so young, he plays with confidence and feeling." "Yes," another replied. "It is more than talent. He seems to feel the music, not just play it. The pianist, sensing the growing attention, decided to add a playful challenge. "Shall we try something more interesting?" he asked. He pressed a series of keys quickly, creating a pattern that was tricky but fun. "Can you follow this?" he asked, smiling. The prince's eyes lit up. Challenges excited him, and he was ready to see if he could meet this one. He pressed the keys carefully, trying to replicate the pianist's pattern. At first, he stumbled, hitting a few wrong notes, but he laughed quietly at himself and tried again. The pianist laughed too, not mockingly but with delight, watching the young prince persist. After a few attempts, the prince began to succeed. He copied the pattern more accurately and even added a small variation of his own. The pianist clapped lightly. "Excellent! You are not just following. You are creating." Encouraged, the prince continued. He began to combine several patterns, weaving them into a melody that was longer, more intricate, and filled with expression. His fingers moved more confidently, his timing improved, and his sense of rhythm became more natural. Every note seemed deliberate, every pause intentional. He was no longer playing notes, he was telling a story through music. The audience, which had quietly grown larger, watched in awe. Some could hardly believe that someone so young could produce such a performance. Even the pianist, who had seen countless students and prodigies, was surprised. He had expected a polite demonstration, but what he saw now was raw talent, combined with curiosity, creativity, and courage. At one point, the prince paused mid-melody, unsure how to continue. The pianist noticed and whispered, "Trust yourself. Play what you feel." The words were simple but powerful. The prince took a deep breath and resumed, letting his feelings guide the melody. The notes flowed more smoothly, with a sense of freedom that had not been there before. It was in this moment that the prince realized something important. Music was not just about perfection. It was about expression. It was about exploring, experimenting, and enjoying the process. The earlier mistakes no longer mattered. Each one had taught him something, and each success, no matter how small, had given him confidence. The pianist clapped quietly when the piece ended. "Remarkable," he said softly. "You are learning not just to play, but to understand the language of music. That is rare at any age." The young prince blushed slightly but felt proud. "Thank you," he said. "I feel happy when I play. And that is the most important part," the pianist replied. "The joy of creating something, of discovering your own voice. Never forget that." As the day continued, the prince and the pianist began to experiment together. The pianist would play a series of notes, and the prince would try to respond with his own improvisation. Sometimes the prince succeeded immediately. Sometimes he stumbled and laughed at himself. Each time, the pianist encouraged him, blending playful teasing with sincere guidance. The hall filled with music and laughter, a rare combination in the normally formal palace. Staff and guests alike were drawn into the moment, forgetting their usual routines to watch and listen. The young prince had transformed from a curious beginner into a confident participant in a dialogue with music. His eyes sparkled with excitement every time he discovered a new combination of notes or rhythm. By afternoon, the young prince had played several new pieces, some he had created entirely on his own. The pianist was clearly impressed but continued to encourage, pushing him gently to explore further. "You are finding your own style," he said. "Keep going, keep experimenting. Music is an adventure, and you are discovering the path." The prince nodded, understanding more and more each day. It was not about impressing others or being perfect. It was about exploring, trying, and discovering. Every melody was a new adventure, and every note taught him something about himself. As the sun began to lower in the sky, painting the hall in golden light, the pianist finally stood back. "You have done wonderfully today," he said. "I am impressed by your courage, your curiosity, and your talent. Keep nurturing it, and you will surprise even yourself." The young prince smiled, feeling a warmth that went beyond pride. He had discovered not only music but a sense of purpose, a feeling that he could create something meaningful and beautiful. The playful challenge that had started as a joke had become a gateway to something far greater. A journey of self-discovery, courage, and joy. Staff members whispered among themselves, clearly inspired. "I have never seen him like this," one said. "It is amazing how much he has grown in just a few days." "Yes," another agreed. "It is not just skill. It is heart, curiosity, and confidence. That is what makes this special." The young prince stayed at the piano a little longer, experimenting with a few final melodies. The hall was quiet now, the only sounds the soft music he created. Each note seemed to carry a story, a piece of his spirit, and a reflection of his courage. He realized that even small steps, playful challenges, and moments of guidance could lead to discoveries far greater than expected. When he finally left the hall that evening, the young prince felt a sense of accomplishment and excitement for the days to come. He had learned that talent alone was not enough. Curiosity, courage, and joy were equally important. And though the famous pianist had come with the intention of a light-hearted joke, the result was far more meaningful. A young prince discovering his own potential, one note at a time. The morning sun filled the palace hall with a soft glow, bouncing off the polished floor and the gleaming black piano. The young prince entered the room with a sense of excitement he could hardly contain. He had been practicing every day, and each time he sat at the piano he discovered something new. Today felt different. There was a quiet energy in the air, almost as if the hall itself was waiting to hear what he would play. As he approached the piano, he noticed a few palace staff quietly standing at the edges of the room. They had been asked to observe only if necessary, but curiosity had drawn them closer. They whispered to each other softly, their eyes fixed on the prince. "He looks more confident than ever," one said. "I wonder what he will play today." The young prince smiled slightly, aware of the attention but not intimidated by it. He had learned in the past days that music was his own, and that the sound he created came from him, not from anyone else's expectations. Sitting on the bench, he ran his fingers lightly over the keys, feeling the familiar texture beneath his touch. He remembered the playful words of the famous pianist, the challenges, and the encouragement. Today, he wanted to surprise himself and everyone else. He started with a melody he had created the previous day, adding subtle changes and variations. His fingers moved with confidence, pressing keys with intention and care. The notes flowed smoothly, weaving a gentle story that filled the room. The staff and a few onlookers who had gathered whispered in admiration. They could see the difference in him. He was no longer simply trying or practicing. He was performing, even if only for himself and the quiet hall. The pianist entered the hall quietly, observing from a distance. He had not expected to see such rapid progress. Yesterday, the prince had shown promise, curiosity, and enthusiasm. But today it was clear that something extraordinary was happening. The prince's sense of rhythm, his choice of notes, and his ability to express emotion through sound went far beyond what most children his age could do. The pianist smiled quietly to himself, feeling both surprise and pride. The young prince noticed him and gave a small nod, acknowledging his presence but not stopping. He felt ready for something more. He had been practicing variations, and now he wanted to see if he could play a longer, more complex piece entirely from memory. Taking a deep breath, he began. The melody was flowing and smooth, with a rhythm that held the attention of everyone in the hall. It carried emotion, soft and tender at first, then growing stronger and more confident. As the prince played, the pianist moved closer. He could hardly believe what he was hearing. The young prince had taken small steps of practice and curiosity and transformed them into something remarkable. There were moments when the notes surprised even him, when the combination of sounds felt so natural that it was hard to imagine he had not been practicing for years. The pianist quietly clapped after a particularly beautiful sequence, careful not to interrupt the flow, but the gesture did not go unnoticed. The palace staff and guests watching began to gasp softly. Some exchanged whispers, unable to hide their amazement. "Did he just do that?" one asked quietly. "That was perfect." "Yes," another replied. "I have never seen anyone his age play with such confidence and expression." The prince noticed their reactions, but he did not let them distract him. He was focused entirely on the music. The piano had become a bridge between his thoughts and the world, allowing him to express what words could not. Each note carried intention, each pause reflected thought, and the rhythm seemed to flow naturally from his curiosity and determination. The pianist could no longer hold back a small joke, leaning forward with a grin. "I am starting to worry that you will surpass me soon," he said softly, keeping his voice playful. The prince laughed quietly, not missing a note. "I am just learning," he replied. "I like playing. That is all." "But you are playing wonderfully," the pianist said. "It is more than learning. You are creating, imagining, and sharing. Few people can do that." The young prince continued, now experimenting with faster sections and subtle pauses. He added small touches he had noticed the pianist doing during their previous meetings. The sound filled the hall with energy, and the atmosphere became almost magical. Every listener could feel the skill, the curiosity, and the courage that flowed through the young prince's fingers. At one point, he attempted a particularly difficult transition between notes, one he had struggled with earlier. This time, he executed it flawlessly. The pianist's eyes widened, and he let out a small, impressed laugh. The palace staff quietly gasped, realizing that what had started as a simple morning practice had turned into a performance that none of them had expected. The young prince paused briefly, taking a deep breath. He was beginning to realize that music was no longer just a game or a challenge. It was something he could use to express himself, to communicate, and to connect with others. He played the next section of his piece with even more confidence, adding subtle flourishes that demonstrated both skill and creativity. As the melody reached its peak, the hall seemed to hold its breath. The notes were clear, confident, and expressive. The staff, guests, and even the pianist were captivated. This was more than practice. It was an unexpected display of talent that felt natural, effortless, and completely genuine. The young prince's fingers danced over the keys, each movement precise, yet fluid, as if the music was flowing directly from his imagination. When the final note faded, the hall was silent for a moment. Then, as if on cue, the pianist clapped loudly, joined quickly by the staff and guests. The applause was not just for the performance, but for the courage, curiosity, and joy that the young prince had shown. He blushed slightly, feeling proud but also humbled. He had started the morning with a simple desire to try something new, and now he had achieved something that had genuinely surprised everyone. The pianist moved closer, his expression a mix of amusement and admiration. "I honestly did not expect that," he said softly. "You have grown so much in such a short time. That was more than skill. That was artistry. And it came from you, not from anyone teaching you." The young prince smiled, feeling warmth in his chest. "I just wanted to try," he said. "I like discovering what I can do." "And that is why you are remarkable," the pianist replied. "Talent is important, but curiosity, courage, and joy make someone truly special. You have all three." The staff and guests whispered among themselves, clearly inspired. "I have never seen anything like that," one said quietly. "He is not just talented. He is fearless in a way that few adults are." "Yes," another replied. "It is not just the music. It is how he approaches it. Calm, confident, curious, and joyful." Encouraged by the applause and praise, the young prince decided to try one more piece before the day ended. He had created a melody in his mind, inspired by the sun shining through the palace windows and the soft whispers of the staff. He played it carefully, letting each note reflect his feelings. The melody was gentle at first, growing stronger and more confident as he moved through the keys. It was expressive, heartfelt, and uniquely his own. The pianist watched quietly, noticing subtle touches and expressions that the young prince had added without instruction. The prince was no longer simply learning or imitating. He was creating, exploring, and expressing something deeply personal. Every note carried emotion, intention, and curiosity. It was a moment of true discovery. By the time the prince finished, the hall was filled with a sense of awe. The staff and guests looked at each other, unable to hide their admiration. Even the pianist, who had seen many gifted students, was clearly moved. "That was extraordinary," he said softly. "You have not just learned music. You have embraced it. You have found your voice, and it is beautiful." The young prince smiled shyly, feeling both proud and humbled. He realized that what had begun as a playful challenge had turned into a powerful experience. Music had become more than notes. It had become a way to express himself, to connect with others, and to discover a strength and confidence he had not known he possessed. As the day drew to a close, the pianist gathered his belongings and prepared to leave. He knelt slightly to speak to the young prince. "Remember this day," he said softly. "It is not just about talent or skill. It is about curiosity, courage, and joy. Keep discovering, keep experimenting, and never stop enjoying the music you create." The young prince nodded, feeling a sense of warmth and excitement for the future. He had discovered something extraordinary about himself, something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. And though the morning had begun with a playful joke, it had ended with an experience that would inspire him for years to come. Even after the pianist left, the young prince remained at the piano for a while longer. He played softly, experimenting with small variations, testing rhythms, and discovering new sounds. The notes seemed to reflect his feelings: curiosity, joy, pride, and a quiet determination. He understood now that music was a journey, one that required courage, effort, and openness to discovery. The staff and guests quietly left, giving him space. They knew they had witnessed something rare, the moment when a child's curiosity, courage, and joy transformed into genuine talent that surprised and inspired everyone. The palace, usually quiet and formal, had been filled with laughter, music, and amazement. The young prince finally left the hall as the sun dipped lower in the sky. He felt a sense of fulfillment and excitement. He had not only played the piano, he had discovered a new part of himself, and he knew that tomorrow, when he returned, there would be more to explore, more to learn, and more joy to find in the music that had become a part of him. The palace was unusually quiet that morning, but there was a sense of anticipation in the air. The young prince woke early, feeling a flutter of excitement he could not quite explain. He had been playing the piano every day for several mornings now, discovering something new each time, but today felt special. He did not yet know why, but he sensed that today would be remembered, not just by him, but by everyone who witnessed it. He hurried to the grand hall, his steps echoing softly across the polished floor. The sunlight was streaming through the tall windows, reflecting off the piano's black surface. It seemed to shimmer in the light, as though it had been waiting for him. The prince approached and ran his fingers lightly over the keys, testing the sounds, remembering the encouragement of the famous pianist from previous visits. He felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement. Today he wanted to do more than just play. He wanted to create something that would surprise even himself. The palace staff and a few early visitors had already gathered quietly at the edges of the hall. They had heard the young prince practicing over the past days and were curious to see what he would do next. There were whispers among them, a mix of expectation and amazement. "I wonder how much he has improved," one said softly. "It seems like he is becoming more confident every day." "Yes," another replied. "Yesterday was incredible, but today, who knows? He might truly astonish us all." The young prince sat on the piano bench and closed his eyes for a brief moment. He remembered the playful challenges, the small jokes, and the gentle encouragement from the famous pianist. Those moments had taught him more than just notes or rhythms. They had shown him that music was about joy, curiosity, and courage. Taking a deep breath, he opened his eyes and pressed the first key. The sound echoed softly, filling the hall with warmth. He began with a melody he had practiced the day before, letting it flow naturally. His fingers moved with confidence and purpose, producing a sound that was both smooth and expressive. The melody grew longer, weaving together notes he had learned and small variations he had created. It was not perfect, but it carried something much more important: emotion, personality, and a sense of discovery. The staff and visitors watched quietly, holding their breath, captivated by the young prince's skill. Suddenly, the pianist entered the hall quietly. He had come without announcement, curious to see the prince's progress once more. As he stepped closer, he stopped, listening intently. What he heard was more than just skill, it was creativity, expression, and confidence. The young prince had grown rapidly over the past days, but this was beyond anything he had expected. Each note seemed intentional, each pause full of meaning, and each variation reflected thought and curiosity. The pianist smiled, feeling both surprise and admiration. He knew that today, something remarkable was about to happen. He stepped back, observing quietly, letting the young prince continue without interruption. The prince noticed him and nodded briefly but did not let it distract him. He was focused entirely on the music, as if the piano and he were having a conversation no one else could understand. The melody began to change subtly. The young prince added faster sections, small trills, and delicate pauses that created tension and release. His fingers danced across the keys, moving with precision, fluidity, and confidence. Every note carried emotion, and the hall seemed to respond to it. The staff and visitors were silent, completely captivated by the performance. They had never expected a child so young to play with such depth and understanding. At one point, the young prince attempted a particularly difficult transition, one that even adults might find challenging. His fingers moved over the keys with accuracy and grace. The pianist's eyes widened in surprise. The staff whispered softly to each other, amazed. "Did he just do that?" one said. "That was incredible." "Yes," another replied. "It is more than talent. He is expressing himself. Look at the confidence in his posture, the way he feels the music." The young prince continued, adding small improvisations that he had discovered himself. He experimented with dynamics, pressing some keys softly, others with force, creating a melody that was alive and moving. It was as if the music itself was telling a story, full of emotion, curiosity, and discovery. Each note seemed to carry a piece of his heart, and those listening could feel it. The pianist could no longer contain his admiration. "Remarkable," he whispered to himself. "I have never seen such natural expression from someone so young." He clapped quietly after a particularly beautiful sequence, careful not to interrupt the flow, but his gesture did not go unnoticed. The young prince paused for a brief moment, then continued with even more confidence. He had realized something important. Music was not about perfection, but about expression. Each mistake, each stumble had taught him something. Each success, no matter how small, had given him courage. And now, he was no longer playing notes. He was creating a story, sharing a part of himself with everyone in the hall. As the melody reached its peak, the room seemed to hold its breath. The music was powerful yet gentle, complex yet simple, full of feeling and life. The young prince's fingers moved with energy and care, each note intentional, each pause meaningful. The staff, visitors, and the pianist were completely captivated. They had expected a playful attempt, but what they were witnessing was extraordinary. A child discovering his voice and sharing it boldly with the world. When the final note faded, the hall was silent for a moment. Then, applause erupted. The staff clapped, the visitors cheered quietly, and the pianist smiled broadly, his eyes shining with admiration. The young prince blushed, feeling proud and happy. He had not only played the piano, he had shared a piece of himself, and everyone had noticed. The pianist stepped closer, leaning over slightly. "I honestly did not expect that," he said softly. "You have not just learned music, you have discovered it. You are expressing something that is uniquely yours. Few people ever reach this level, even as adults." The young prince smiled shyly. "I just wanted to try," he said simply. "I wanted to see what I could do. And that is why it is extraordinary," the pianist replied. "Talent is important, but curiosity, courage, and joy make someone truly remarkable. You have all three." Encouraged by the praise, the young prince decided to try one more piece before the day ended. This time, he created a melody entirely from his imagination. He thought about the sunlight in the hall, the quiet presence of the staff, and the encouragement of the pianist. His fingers moved with intention, pressing keys with confidence and care. The melody flowed naturally, full of expression and discovery. The hall was silent again, everyone watching intently. The young prince's music carried emotion. Soft, tender, joyful, and brave. Each note seemed to tell a story, and those listening could feel it deeply. The pianist was visibly moved, leaning back and letting the music speak for itself. He had witnessed many performances, but this was rare, pure, natural, and expressive talent combined with curiosity and courage. When the final note of this last piece faded, the hall erupted once more in applause. Staff and visitors were inspired and amazed, exchanging whispers of astonishment. "I have never seen anything like that," one whispered. "He is not just talented. He is fearless, expressive, and full of curiosity." "Yes," another agreed. "It is not just the music. It is the joy, the courage, and the heart that he puts into it. That is what makes it unforgettable." The young prince sat back, breathing deeply, feeling a sense of fulfillment he had never known before. He had discovered not only his talent but a part of himself, a quiet strength, courage, and curiosity that had been waiting to emerge. He realized that what had begun as a playful joke from the famous pianist had become a journey of self-discovery, expression, and joy. The pianist knelt slightly to speak to him one last time. "Remember this day," he said softly. "It is not about being perfect or impressing others. It is about curiosity, courage, and joy. Keep exploring, keep creating, and never stop discovering your own voice. You have something extraordinary, and the world will be better for it." The young prince nodded, feeling a warmth and happiness that went beyond pride. He had learned that small steps, playful challenges, and moments of encouragement could lead to something truly remarkable. Music was no longer just an instrument. It was a way to express himself, to communicate, and to explore the world. Even after the pianist left, the young prince remained at the piano for a while longer. He experimented with small variations, testing new rhythms and discovering new sounds. The hall, usually quiet and formal, was alive with music and imagination. Each note reflected his curiosity, joy, and growing confidence. He had learned that even the simplest challenge could reveal hidden potential, and that courage and curiosity could transform play into something extraordinary. By evening, the young prince finally left the hall. He felt a sense of excitement and fulfillment, knowing that he had discovered something that would stay with him for life. The experience had not only revealed his talent, but also taught him lessons about courage, curiosity, and the joy of discovery. He understood now that music was more than notes. It was a way to express the heart, to connect with others, and to explore the world. And though the playful joke from the famous pianist had started it all, it had ended with something far greater. A young prince finding his voice, surprising himself and everyone around him, and discovering the joy of creating something uniquely his own. The memory of that day, the music he had played, and the encouragement he had received would remain with him forever, inspiring him to keep exploring, creating, and enjoying every note he played.